being firm that like this is where you need to perform to, and them seeing examples of people who we've helped and coached and trained and still are not missing the mark, and like, hey, if we've done everything to get you to where we expect you to be and you're still not hitting it, maybe you're just not the right fit for this role or for Acosta. And I don't mind reassigning you if you're a great employee, but you know, if we've thrown everything at it and we really feel like we've tried and you're not hitting it, like, why are we still, having you in this role?
Hey, what's up, To The Point listeners? It's your boy, Cristiano, the host of To The Point Home Services Podcast. And even though we have a brand new co-host, Chad Peterman, sometimes one of his nicknames is Perfect Chad. Well, today, Chad is not so perfect because Chad had the wrong time for this episode. So already with a no call, no show on his record for the podcast. So I told our guest I would get to beat up on him a little bit for not being on here. Still figuring out some logistics since he's in Indianapolis and I'm in Phoenix now. There's a 3-hour difference and not a 2-hour difference, Chad. 3-hour difference. But I'm excited to have our guest, friend of mine, who we met, I think, I want to say it's like 2017. We have Lauren Acosta-Huckleberry on here, who's the president of Acosta Heating, Cooling, and Electric out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Is that when we met? Was 2017 or 16, or somewhere around there?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
And I think, was it, so Tall Paul was our old, no, it was Mizuraka. Mizuraka is the one that I think introduced us, or maybe it was Tall Paul. One of those people,
one of those guys
introduced us back then. Yeah. So it's cool to have you on here now in 2024 and to be able to tell the Acosta story. And I just, it's always cool to still have a conversation with someone who's privately held, and you are.
Yes, we are.
So I want our listeners
still privately held.
Yeah, good for you. And we'll talk through some of these things on here too. I just thought it was important to share with the listeners, just a little bit of our history, because it is cool for me to have just watched the business, from afar, and we've been able to stay. Thankfully, social media allows you to stay connected and kind of see everybody's lives, like grew up and stuff. So what I always thought was interesting is that your dad. I met your dad pretty early, and actually I don't think it was the same day, but I met him and I got to know Zeke, and great guy. If you've met Zeke, you get it. I always love the story because I hope I don't butcher this. I should have asked you ahead of time, but I'm pretty sure. It was that he left Cuba at 12 or 13, somewhere around there, 12 or 13. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right before like the Cuban Missile Crisis or some crazy shit like that, right?
The day before.
So good timing.
Literally.
That worked out. So let's do this. First off, thanks for making time and joining us in the podcast. I'm excited for all of our listeners to kind of hear your story and go through some of your things. And even though Chad's not on here, he did send me a few questions to ask you that are total Chad questions, so I'm sure you'll appreciate those. But let's just do this for the listeners, like right out of the gate. Let's go ahead and just let them know, where is the business today? Give them an idea of the size of the company so that way they can have a good reference point. But then let's back up and walk through a little bit of the journey to get there. So Let's roll with that. From your dad getting into the biz.
Yeah. So today we are north of 10 million as far as revenue that we do. The bulk of that is on the HVAC side, which is our sort of origin is HVAC. And in 2020, we added on electrical, and that's been a nice addition to our business. Right. To do electrical. And right now, today, we are sitting at 50 employees.
Good for you. Well, so if I'm a listener, I'm thinking, wait, did you say you started out in HVAC and then you went to electrical? Usually that's not the progression that typically goes.
No,
you guys just don't want to do plumbing? Like, what is it?
No. I mean, there's a little bit of help from my husband. Everybody gives me a hard time because I would not hire him or bring him on until he got his electrical license. And he got his electrical license in 2019. And then I hired him and brought him on, and we started an electrical division.
So, wow.
Yeah.
Talking about, all right. And that worked out okay.
It worked out okay. We're still together. We're still working together. It's all good.
Well, listen, I mean, I think, it's like I work with my wife, and we made it 16 years. So like
Yeah.
we figured it out.
Yeah.
But she didn't make me earn anything. I just was able to do it. I mean, we kind of just did it together.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure I would have actually listened to her anyway. But so let's do this. Okay, so your dad comes, comes in, and if I remember correct, like he went through some training, or got into some sort of like training program or something on those lines. Like, give me into because the business is like 51 or 50 some odd years old. Like, is 1972? That was okay. That's before my time. Like, walk us through just a little bit of how we got into the business. I mean, you started in HVAC, and then I'll just kind of poke some holes along the way.
Sure. So he has, Acosta's origin story is, 100% my dad's story. So, and I love telling it because I think it's a cool story.
Yep.
He left Cuba in the early 60s it was supposed to be his mom, him, and his dad. But at that time, you could leave Cuba, but you had to have your house inventoried. You had to declare everything that you had, and then you would go to the airport in advance. They would re-inventory your house, and if anything was missing, you had to give them the money of it, or you had to give it to them. And so my dad, the three of them, my dad, my grandmother, and my grandfather went to the airport, but my grandfather had sold his car to pay for the plane tickets. And they said, well, you have to, give us the money or give us the car. And he said, I don't have it. So he told my dad and my grandmother, go on, I'll get the next flight. I'll get this figured out. I'll make it with you guys. But turns out the very next day was the start of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there was no more flights. So it was just my dad and my grandmother, figuring it out on their own. And they, first, spent a couple days in Miami, just like every Cuban does, right? And then my grandmother had an uncle in Newark, New Jersey. And so they went and stayed with her uncle in Newark, New Jersey. And he went to 8th grade in Newark, New Jersey. But at the time, was the case with a lot of my family, and a lot of Cubans, they thought they were just coming to the U.S., Kennedy was going to get rid of Castro, and then they'd get to go back home. And so when he went to 8th grade in Newark, New Jersey, they took all the Cuban kids, all the Cuban immigrants, put them in one classroom and just taught them 8th grade in Spanish, because why are we going to waste teaching them English? They're going back home, as soon as Kennedy gets rid of Castro, right, and, it'll be over. Right. Well, right. And so he went to 8th grade in Newark, New Jersey. And then because it was just him and my grandmother, he got a little side job helping the neighborhood handyman fix things. And he kind of got, interested in fixing things. And they've been in Newark for a little while. And then another family member had moved here to Charlotte. And they said, oh, you should come check out Charlotte. It's really nice. And there was a sock factory, because cotton and textiles was really big at the time here in the Carolinas. And there was a sock factory that was actually owned by a Cuban gentleman. And he made like this, public service announcements of sorts and said, hey, if you're Cuban and you need a job, come to Charlotte. And so that's how, some of my uncles and family members had ended up here in Charlotte. My dad comes to visit and he tells my grandmother, Charlotte is way nicer than Newark. We should definitely move to Charlotte.
Agreed,
right? And so they moved to Charlotte. My, dad was a young teenager at the time, but really was just working because it was just the two of them. And this sock factory actually is how my parents met. Both my parents are Cuban, and they each had uncles that worked at the sock factory. And my dad, my mom came one day to like bring lunch to her uncle, and my dad was like, "Who's that girl?" And they got their uncles to introduce them. So my parents met, and the gentleman that owned the sock factory noticed that my dad was pretty good at fixing things, and he told my dad, hey, the local tech college here in Charlotte, I heard, is starting this new AC program. It's going to be the wave of the future. You should go get in this program. So my dad goes, you have to take a little entrance exam to get into the program. He passes it. They let him in. Well, my dad hadn't gone to high school, and he's about to finish this 2-year program. And they're like, hey, by the way, we need your high school diploma or your GED. He's like, I don't have one of those. And he worked it out to let they let him go essentially an extra year, and he got his GED after he got his HVAC degree. And so he's about 19 at this point, and he got a job, working for a refrigeration company. Because even then, at that time, there weren't a lot of homes that had air conditioning. So refrigeration really was the thing. So he started with refrigeration. And then when my dad was about, I guess, 20 or 21, his father, my grandfather, was finally able to make it to the US. And he ended up, finding a way through Mexico and then back, here. And he had a really crazy story in the time that he was in Cuba, because he was one of those people, just like you hear about, that try and escape on rafts, right, to just get out of Cuba. And he had done that, but he had gotten captured, and then he was jailed for many years for having done that.
That's a whole other crazy story
But he did eventually make it to the US. And so finally he's here, and he sees my dad doing, this refrigeration stuff. And he is just insistent to my dad that, hey, we're in the US, we have this opportunity. You have to start your own business, right? And so at the ripe old age of 22, my dad starts the business with him and two other guys. He starts it out of his parents' house. He takes like a what used to be a window, turns it into another entrance, and turns that into his business. And at 22, he started it. And at the beginning, it really was just like adding air conditioners to homes, right? Because so few homes even had air conditioning, right? He was like a heating contractor that added air conditioning to homes, right? And he slowly grew it, little by little. And he, when I was a kid, I was around the business, right? I was answering phones, filing, all that kind of stuff that, your parents expect you to do when they own a business. And, but I went off to college and I did my own thing for about 6 years. I worked for a marketing company. I worked for Vector Marketing. So anybody who knows about Cutco knives, right? I did that for 6 years successfully, made a lot of money. My mom thought I was crazy. And, but in 2008, after having done that for about 6 years, my dad offered me a job to come and do sales for him. But he made me go to school all over again. He made me go to Central Piedmont and take HVAC classes. He sent me, at the time we were big train dealers, he sent me to Tyler, Texas for 3 weeks to get what he called at the time, he called it getting train washed.
I've heard that.
And eventually he let me out into the field. And so that's how I started in 2008, was going on to the sales side of things. And I even met my husband at that time. And we, started a family, and I was still on the sales side, still crawling crawl spaces while I was expecting. Just fine. Right?
See, you hear that whenever you're all up there crying in the crawl spaces and attics, at least you weren't pregnant and doing it.
Like I have two boys, they're 10 and 12 now, but my first pregnancy, it was everyone around me. Like everybody around me was like, girl, you have got to stop climbing on ladders. Like you need to go sit down somewhere. And I did. I sat down somewhere. But then with my second pregnancy, I remember distinctly, the crawl space when I was like, oh yeah, I can't do this anymore. I had squeezed myself over some ductwork to get to the furnace. And then when I turned back around, I was like, how am I going to get out of here? And I ended up crawling the whole perimeter of the crawl space to find an access to get out.
You're ambitious.
Yeah. But yeah, that's my story. As I continued in the sales process, my dad started giving me, more and more responsibilities inside the office, some managerial stuff. And then my dad and I, a little bit, I will say, truthfully, honestly, we clashed a little bit because he kept saying to me that he was going to retire when he was 65, and he was 67. And I'm looking at my watch like, yo, when are you going to
You're a little bit late.
This, man?
You're a little late.
You're late. And I get an email from him. I'm actually out of town. with my husband, and we're eating dinner, and I get an email from him, and I open up the email, and it's an email with an attachment from where he's registered with the Secretary of State that I'm the president of the company. So that's how I found out.
Oh, by email. That was thoughtful.
Yeah, he
Come on,
emailed it. I mean, we had talked about it. It wasn't total surprise, but I was like, oh, okay. So it's like really happening, like for real, for real. Got it. Cool.
It's actually, I mean, it kind of does seem like something that Zeke would do. Now, I mean,
Yeah.
I think about that, and he didn't mean anything. Like, obviously, he means well. So it's like,
Yeah. No, I wasn't upset. I was just like, oh wow, it's really happening.
all right,
Okay,
it's legit
cool.
happening.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick. So let me ask a couple questions, and we'll get into like some of the details of the business. One, who do you think you're most like? Are you most like your dad? Are you most like your grandma? Like, who are you most like?
Oh yeah, my dad and I are very similar, right? Which, as teenagers was like us just like bumping heads like crazy. But no, we are very, very similar.
Got it. Okay. So, and he didn't have any business experience. He just kind of jumped into it as a technician and
Right.
yeah, right. Okay.
No.
So, I mean, I think that's actually a very common story in the trades. I mean, even, for me too, I learned business by being in business.
Yeah.
It is a cool story though, like on multiple levels, but
Right.
and I've heard you tell this story multiple times and talk about your dad's origin story too. I think it's also fair to say like yours, it's yours too.
Absolutely.
I mean, and now you take over officially as president at the end of 2019. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Good
Exactly.
timing. So
Great timing.
So
yeah.
hang on. So you started as a comfort consultant in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Great timing there too.
Great timing too. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, at least that prepped you a little bit for this weird COVID stuff. So actually that's really interesting. And you were more than prepared for to take on, the role of president for Acosta. And it's cool that your dad sent you to school to do that and just like made you work your way through. I think that's how you maintain respect of all your employees. Cause I know you have a really good, really good relationship with your team and your staff and supporting them and caring about them and doing all those things.
Yep.
So now it's yours to run. All right. We're in 2019. Was there any, because I can remember meeting with you originally and then having to meet with your dad and then having to meet together. And it was like, I could tell you guys have disagreements, but like both passionate about them. And they were coming from two different places. So just two different, you had your opinion and I thought your opinion was correct at the time. But when you take over as president, is there, you went into COVID, so it's kind of a weird, it was kind of a weird start. Well, it wasn't kind of, it was a weird start for you. But then you also went through a couple really fantastic years as the trades did as a whole. Was there any immediate changes or things that you made that you've been wanting to make when you came on board as president and then now you're the one that can make the call?
I mean, one of the things that I first did was decide to bring on an operations manager. And we interviewed people external, we had some internal candidates, and one of our internal candidates was a gentleman that was our top salesperson, consistent close rate, well over 2 million in revenue every year. And he was like, yeah, I want to be the operations manager. And I just remember panicking, well, if this guy's the operation manager, where are we going to get all of our sales from? Right. And, does he understand that being a manager is going to be a pay cut? Do we have all of these things figured out? And he and I had a really good relationship because he had, ultimately, end of the story, right? He became our operations manager, but Donovan is the kind of person that, would come to me from time to time and bring me things that were causing pain from his vantage point as a salesperson, right? Either an install process wasn't going well or blah, 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 right? And at first, when he would bring these to me, they started to look a little bit like gripe sessions. And I just said back to him, hey, I don't mind being somebody you can vent to, but these meetings aren't really productive unless you're actually coming and have thought through what is the solution? How do we get around this?
Good.
And we had developed this rhythm where if he was coming to talk to me, I knew that whatever it was like legit, right? Because he had really thought about it. He had thought about what the solution was. And I also knew that it probably wasn't going to be something that was going to be easy or that I was going to like to hear, but needed to hear, right? And so we already had some of that relationship, and it has really bled through in all the years that he's been our operations manager, has really helped to propel our business.
Yeah, that's good because, and he's still your guy today.
Yeah.
And what's cool about that is it also kind of sets the tone for that, in regards to your leadership style, that everyone can be comfortable coming to you with, problems or challenges, as long as you also come with solutions or at least your thoughts on. I mean, that does make it productive. And I've been through so many of those conversations, and we all have them. But it set the tone for how you are as a leader. I think that's a very cool thing to do, because you wasn't like a dictatorship style leadership. So I appreciate that. Yeah. And when you took it on in 2019, what, to give the listeners some frame of reference of size versus your 10 million, 50 employees today, where were you guys at roughly then?
I'm not going to remember our employee count.
It don't matter. Just in regards to size.
We were doing, from like 2015 on, we were doing, pretty consistently 5 to 7 million, sometimes getting a little higher than that. But that was kind of where we were landing. And 2019, for us, for Acosta, 2019 was like not an excellent year. We had a lot of, growing pains, and we went into 2020, honestly, not being very healthy. And it was, all of this pandemic stuff just like added to the anxiety of all of the things. And, candidly, that PPP money was really helpful to us. Yep. It really was. It really, really was. It did what it was supposed to do, at least, right?
Yep.
And, 2021 was a little better. 2022 was even better. And for Acosta, 2023 was a really good year. It really was. I know, other people have had, challenges, but we had different challenges in 2023 other than revenue challenges.
Listen, by the way, like, thanks for being like transparent about that. Like that's like when you get the good stuff out of this, because everybody's been through some sort of shit like this already, and nobody wants to talk about it. And I love being able to talk about it, because that to me is like the most relatable thing, that you can really connect with someone that way. I'm around enough people that brag about themselves. And then these are my friends too. Like, but everybody also still talks about their lows too and their negatives. I just happen to like that part more, because it's like we can fix some things in there. Like, that's where we can become really productive, is in that moment. Now you're right. There's a lot of people who did have a rough 2023.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who view 2023 as rough because they're comparing it to the 2021-22 years, which is unreasonable to say because you didn't hit 20% growth or whatever. Like, you had a good 2023. I've heard that a few different times. And I also think it's based on a few things. You guys have been in business a long time, so you've got good brand equity in the market of Charlotte. So even at your size, you've been around a long time.
Yep.
And so that's certainly helpful. I think the markets were different, markets are helpful. But what's interesting is that, I think on the last podcast, we were talking about 2023 and how, like, hey, let's just get back to blocking and tackling, like some of the basics, and doing those things really, really well. Yep. But that's not what everybody has to do, because not everybody's in that same situation.
Right.
So 2023, was a great year for you guys. Congratulations. It's nice. Now you guys are sitting at 10 million to get 50 employees. How is 2024 starting off for you? We're already through Q1. Like, how is it starting? By the way, before you say that, I'm just going to put this out here, because I've said this multiple times. I've been through this whole thing. Like, when you started my business at this, at the same time. And so I've kind of been through these different market swings, but I definitely, been in, because I only have worked in this. So, I mean, you guys are a client of ours, so, and you and I know each other for a while, but I said Q1 is going to be the hardest that we've been through, because there's way more variables into all the private equity money that's at play now too. Was going to be difficult. People are like, more difficult than 2023, I'm like, I think it's going to be more difficult than 2023. I think 2024 Q1 is going to be the hardest. If we can get through that, I think we're going to be okay, as long as Mother Nature like kicks in a little bit and helps us.
Yeah.
So, but how has your 2024 started off?
So I will say that Q1 of 2024 was a time period when we were like, wait a minute, all of these ambitious growth goals that we had, maybe we need to resharpen our pencil on these big, crazy goals that we had. And we made some adjustments, internally to processes and partners that we were using and other vendors. And we were like, do we have to do this? No, we don't have to do this. Let's cut this out. Let's stay healthy. Let's keep growing and keep our employees, be able to be healthy and have the growth that we're wanting. And so once we sharpened our pencil, we had a decent March. We had a really nice April, and I'm looking forward to May for the summer.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah.
You and me both.
Yep.
And that's great, but because you kept saying healthy, the healthy obviously being to me the most important part, because you've got a lot of people relying on you to run a healthy business. Not just yourself, but all your employees.
Yeah, I feel that one like for real, right? Like, well, not only because it's like our mission, right? Like our mission as an organization is to make lives better, right? Like I always my favorite thing to do when we hire somebody new is to like take them through the building, introduce them to everyone, tell everyone's story with Acosta. Cause one of my favorite things about our organization is like how many, tenured employees that we've got. Like all of our leadership team is people that have grown in our business. And I think that's awesome. I think that that's one of the coolest things, to be able to show people the growth opportunity within our organization. And I don't get up every morning like super jazzed that we're going to fix somebody's air conditioner or fix somebody's electrical panel, right? Like I get up and I'm excited every morning to be able to make the lives of our employees better, right? And if I can make the lives of our employees better, they're going to have a positive impact on our customers. They're going to have a positive impact on their families, and we'll be able to make our community better. That's what excites me.
Yeah, that's cool. And actually, if Chad was on here right now, he'd be like going all in on this one too. He's actually, he doesn't show his emotion as much as you show your emotion. Yeah. But I know that's like what he doesn't go out and work on anything. Like that's not his deal, but he does care about his people, and he wants to, he has a lot of good leadership qualities and that I respect about him, because he's pours so much into his team.
Yep.
And you have to, right? Because otherwise you don't have a business. You have people to go and serve the clients.
Right.
So let's do this. Now, and talking about Chad, he had submitted a couple of questions for me to ask you. I think this actually plays into it because, now more than ever, paying attention to like measurable KPIs and making sure that even your management team knows how to use those to move teams forward.
Yep.
And you guys are Nexstar members, or you?
We are.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So one of the questions that Chad wanted me to ask you is, how are you guys utilizing KPIs within the business to coach the field professionals? Like, so he's, one of the things that he and I committed to each other on this podcast was to start to talk about some like real KPIs, because you hear one thing and then maybe the definition doesn't, you aren't talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
But in this instance, he's talking about how are you using your KPIs to, to coach all your field professionals. Like, do you have something in place like you're saying, these are the metrics that we're using?
Yep. Yeah. So I think about that in two ways. One way is, our managers are individually on a weekly basis meeting with each person and going over their KPIs and showing them where they are in that mark. And also like being firm that like, this is where you need to perform to, and them seeing examples of people who we've helped and coached and trained and still are not missing the mark. And like, hey, if we've done everything to get you to where we expect you to be and you're still not hitting it, maybe you're just not the right fit for this role or for Acosta. And I don't mind reassigning you if you're a great employee, but if we've thrown everything at it and we really feel like we've tried and you're not hitting it, like, why are we still, having you in this role?
Right.
But I also think about, one of the ways that, maybe not KPIs exactly, but making sure that everybody understands like where we are as an organization and communicating and over communicating of like shouting out every single day, our operations manager, Donovan, every single day, in the morning sends out a message after our daily huddle and says, hey, this is what each manager has committed that we're going to do for today. And this is what we're starting off the day with. And then sends a follow-up every afternoon at 3 of like, here's where we landed and here's what we've got going for tomorrow.
So, which is cool because like that way he's kind of staying in there, staying on everything daily. Everybody kind of understands the expectations or what's going on that day. I did a podcast with a friend of mine named Chris Hoffman Brothers out in St. Louis and Nashville. And he was talking about when they would work their plan or their budget or their goal for the year, that they would work from the bottom up. And it talked about getting like your field professionals, everybody to be a part of the plan to reach the budgeting. So everybody kind of has set their own expectations for themselves. I thought that was a really great idea because then, they came up with the plan themselves. Like you have an idea of what you need to do, but you help them work through the plan for themselves. That's actually a pretty cool tool to use because there's a gnat flying in my face. Did you see that? Jeez.
I can see it.
Almost went like right in my mouth. I was sweating. But it might be the first time it's ever happened to me while I've been live. But he was talking about how that's how they would build out their budgeting was from the bottom up. I thought that was really cool because then they are a part of the solution and they came up with their own expectations to hit the goal and you can measure to those things. And then that's like to your point is some people, even though you remove all the obstacles, you give all the training, you have all the conversations, just don't work out. And then you got to move on. I mean, it sucks, but you got to move on because you have a responsibility for this business to lead this business and you've given all the opportunity. But that's why I believe that anytime you're utilizing these KPIs is so important because it's just the accountability piece of it and the business needs to remain healthy. That's your responsibility.
Yep. Yeah. And I have some great managers, right? So my service manager, Marcia, who has grown with her business. She actually started as one of our CSRs. And then she was our dispatcher. She was a fantastic dispatcher. And then she was our warehouse manager for 3 years. And now for a little over a year has been our service manager. And she knows every little bit of everything, which is, super helpful.
Super helpful. Yeah.
She's been on so many sides of the business.
Yeah. And she probably has tons of respect too, because she's done all these different positions and worked her way through the business. That's fantastic.
Yep. But she does an excellent job of what you were just describing, where, when we have that monthly goal of what we need to get accomplished, she generally is not necessarily starting with them of like, here's what we have to do. She's getting from them like, okay, this is how many calls we plan to do. What can you guys make happen with this? And almost always that number of what they're saying they can make accomplished with the amount of calls that we're going to get to them is bigger than what our budget says that we're going to have to do. Right. So she helps to really involve them and help to hit the goals that we've got to do as a business.
Perfect. I mean, and that's, again, but she's using real numbers.
Right.
Yeah. So, hey, real quick, I want to go back because I don't want to forget. I was just making a note of this. And because of my ADHD, I got completely sidetracked. But when you're talking about Donovan making that change from being your number one sales guy to now over ops, I'm sure people were listening to that and gave them like anxiety because they're thinking like, oh shit, I'm like maybe in that same position, and just like it probably was you like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because does he understand? Well, you still have to look at that from like, what am I going to lose in sales?
Right.
How did that end up panning out for you? Because did someone else step up? Is that how it is? Did you find another person to come in? Like what was the transition that happened there?
Yeah. So, part of the transition was a commitment from him to help to make sure that he was going to get anybody that we replaced him with trained up to the level that he was at. And so, in the beginning, one, because he was a new manager within our organization, but just also human nature, he would sort of fall back into like focusing on sales because that's what he knew best. That's what he understood best. And he does have a great influence and impact on our sales department, but he's also really grown in all the other areas of the business as well.
Got it. So what's cool about this is that you have some tenured people who are leaders in your business who've been through the business, and that actually makes the most sense to me too, because he has he has a responsibility to the business to help coach these people to continue to make sales for that's part of part of operations. People will say no. You got sales and marketing, and you've got ops over here. A lot of times it is true, but it works so much better when it all works together. Like there should be this friction. It typically doesn't happen until you become like a bigger business. But he stepped right into the role he's comfortable with too. But he was still able to lead and coach at the same time. Mm-hmm. Now leadership. Because you've had a few people who have been there, who are leaders who've been there a long time. You have to be doing some sort of ongoing coaching and training for those leaders to continue to grow them. I don't know if you've had some come in who from outside the business who stepped into leadership roles. I'm assuming there's probably some of that's happened, maybe not. But what type of training do you do with your leadership team to prepare them to help scale the company? Because my guess is you're not just trying to stop, at 10 million. You want to continue to grow the business. So you got to have leadership team prepared to also lead, scale the business. So what kind of training do you do, to prepare to help prepare them, as their leader to continue to scale the business as we move forward?
One of our core values as an organization is to be ever evolving, right? And I think of, I even think about my dad being an amazing example of that, right? Like going from somebody who, barely spoke English to growing this business over, 45 years. But he was always seeking knowledge, right? Like he understood that if he's going to be able to grow and sustain and all of those things, like he himself has to be getting better. And so he was a great role model for me of like getting more information, like going to the trainings, listening in on that webinar, whatever it is, however obscure it might sound, right? Get the knowledge, chew up the meat, spit out the fat, and adopt what really makes sense for your business, right? Like my dad had gone to a seminar at some point in the 80s, and somebody had said to him, like, the only way to really sustain your business year round is to do, these memberships where somebody is paying you every year to come and clean their air conditioners. And that was pretty unheard of in the Charlotte area in the 80s, but he went to a seminar, he got that knowledge and implemented it. And shoot, we still have customers today that have been part of that plan since the 80s, right? And so that is, really, that's the example that he set, right? And so similarly, right, like I am always trying to make sure that I'm participating and learning. And then like, I can think about even today, I got an email about a newfangled whatever that Generac is coming out with. And I was like, actually, that sounds like that might be something we could use. And I sent it to my sales manager and my warehouse manager, like, y'all go sign up for this webinar and learn what it is so we can see if we can implement it. And so for me, that's the thing. It's like always learning more, encouraging to learn more so that we can grow and develop.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what Zeke was doing too. Is he's being a constant student, but he had to. He had to, right? He had to learn it. But I think we all you hear some of like the biggest players, that are out there. And that's the consistent thing I hear over and over again is that they're always a student. You've got a behemoth in Charlotte and Morris Jenkins,
right?
In that market that's part of the Wrench Group family now, and I know Jonathan Bancroft very well, great human being. And even he, talks about how it's constantly trying to just be a student and learn that's the same thing you hear over and over again, whether it's Dave Geiger, if it's Ken Goodrich, if it's these different,
right.
It's the same thing. So I think you have to, like you never want to be so cocky that you've got it all figured out, right? I think that's when like things could go south for you. But
I had a manager when I worked for Vector Marketing that just really impressed upon me, and it's never left me, but really impressed upon me that you are either green and growing or brown and dying, and there's nothing in between.
That's
right?
really
like
good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. Well, I think that I really believe that true entrepreneurs, not the entrepreneurs, always are kind of like always trying to learn because we're trying to be great. We're trying to do good things. We're trying to build our business. We're trying to grow. We're trying to learn things. And, a lot of people would do, like in your world, I'm not sure if you guys did this. I'm sure you probably did some of it at some level, but going and doing these shop tours and shop visits.
Absolutely.
When people would talk about not wanting to do it, it was like a pride thing. I'm like, no, like,
What?
well, let the pride go, because you can learn a lot of stuff just by going and visiting and talking to my shop. And more often than not, and maybe unless you're in the same market, but more often than not,
We're all doing the same
somebody
thing.
wants to help you out, like, and they're going to teach you a few things and learn a few things,
Yeah.
and Chad is, Chad literally texts me while we're on here saying, hey, you want me to hop on? Chad, sorry, you're not hopping on. It's too late. But he also is a really good, student. He's flying everywhere, always trying to learn from people. And he's $130-40 million, shop. Like, he's always constantly trying to learn things too. And for me, it's been interesting, growing. I mean, Rhino's a 16-year-old business, and there's a lot of employees here, and there's a lot of responsibility. So I carry this with me of if I don't continuously, I end this podcast with no 0 days, I have to continuously be better. And I'm in technology world too. So it's always changing. Even in the marketing side, you understand, there's a lot of shit I got to learn all the time. It never stops. Google is always evolving. It's just a lot. But I also, in some weird way, I enjoy trying to learn new things. It's just, it's part of the deal of being a good leader.
Yep. I went to an XR event. I've been to many, right? But one of them, John Maxwell, was speaking, right? And he's an incredible speaker, right? Like my hand was cramping from all the notes I was taking, right? And he really impressed upon us that your team is only going to grow and expand to the level that you yourself are growing and expanding, right? So you can't expect them to be learners and growing if you are not doing that yourself and modeling that for your people.
Yeah. Lift your lid. Yeah. Lift your lid. Yeah. Or raise your ceiling, lift your lid. I've heard it a couple different ways, but that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know what's next for you guys, if you guys are going to add plumbing at some point, or what the future is for Acosta, but I'm curious to know what it is. And you're not even that far in, you as the actual president of the business, have so much runway ahead of you. You're still private. You're still privately held, which, by the way, I guess I will connect you with all those that I know that are privately held. The reason I love that, a lot of our listeners will reach out to us and say, hey, can you start to bring on some contractors that are more relatable to our size business? And, and there's quite a few that are listening, that this is their education that they're using for now to help scale their businesses. So you being at 10 million and kind of that whole story is very relatable for a lot of the listeners.
Yep.
And, at the end, I know that you don't mind helping people too. So I'll ask if you want to leave your contact info for any of the listeners that might reach out. But but in your mind, in your vision, what's next for Acosta? Is it just stay the course? What's on the horizon for Acosta?
We built a aspirational organizational chart for 2025.
Okay.
And plumbing is definitely on our bingo card of what we would like to add. And, you had asked me earlier, and it's not that I'm resistant, oh my gosh, we can't do plumbing, right? But I am somebody that it's got to be right? I've got to like who it is that we're bringing in, and we're, committing to start this whole division with. And so I'm absolutely excited about doing that and bringing on plumbing. And I think it's healthy for everyone within your organization to understand where you'd like to be. So in our break room, we have our current organizational chart, and then beside it, we have our aspirational organizational chart of where we would like to be.
So have you shown that the aspirational org chart to any company that is, I'm assuming you have it built out to a size of business that you want to be, or somewhere around there, but have you showed that to anyone who is of that size or greater to see hey, am I missing something?
I don't know if I've done it in that way exactly, but I've seen organizational charts of other businesses that are bigger than us. And I was like, oh yeah, I can see how that and this and, all these pieces go together.
Okay, cool. So you got some reference points there.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. I was going to say, because then I can make a bunch of those connections too, but you're in Nexstar. So you got a lot of options for help.
Yeah, that is one of the, we joined Nexstar in 2015. And so we was friends of ours that run a business in Fayetteville. I don't know if you know the Blantons, but
Yep.
yep. So anyway, so I met Will years ago at a Sandler sales training, and he, being a female in the sales business, right? Like it is a little bit of a unicorn, right? Like, there's not a lot of women
Right.
crawling in crawl spaces, but especially at that time. So thankfully, there's more and more and more and more and more. But anyways, we became friends, and he joined Nexstar and had grown his business a bunch. And he was like, "You really should check out this thing." And so he invited my dad and I to go to one of Nexstar's like super meetings. And when you're not an official member yet, they kind of quarantine you over in a corner and like parade all of the coaches in front of you and show you all the amazing things that they can do for you. And at the time, I had already said to my dad that I would really love to join an organization like Nexstar or something like that. We were looking at Service Nation, we were looking at Nexstar, because I knew that the plan that my dad was to retire, and my dad had tons of experience, but if he was going to be exiting the business, I didn't have that same experience. So I wanted the people and the resources to be able to have to go to, because if you give me a roadmap, I got it. We're good. And it was a 3-day conference. And at the end of the first day, like my dad, like hands over his credit card and is like, starts the paperwork to join. And it surprised the heck out of me because my dad is so slow to decide on things. But what Nexstar, said they can do and what they actually have done in our business has been really helpful to us.
Good. Yeah. I mean, and so he was inspired enough to move forward with it. Whatever it was, he believed it. I mean,
yeah.
Well, so let's do this. As like a closing thing, because we're already almost an hour into this thing. Is think about the path that you've just been on from even when you were sitting in the 5 to 7, kind of going back and forth there to the 10 mark. We have a lot of listeners sitting in that world right now, trying to like figure shit out in 2024.
Yeah.
If you could give them advice, on, hey, here's, because you said maybe in 2023, you had some different, issues than maybe others.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't a sales issue, but maybe again, all I'm asking is from your perspective and your business, but what's some good advice that you can give those that are sub 10 million that you would say, hey, if you're going to focus on a few things, maybe it can be these few things?
I mean, for me, what is something that has been of tons of value for me that I have learned the most from is from going and visiting other companies, right? Is from going and, whether it be a training where I'm meeting other people that are our size or bigger than us that I can learn from, and making those connections and literally calling them up and emailing them like, hey, when can I come check you out, right? Like when we were starting an electrical division, that's exactly what I did is I went and visited companies that had added electrical, and like even my husband even like rode along with their electricians for the day to see what like a service call with those companies look like, right? And it was just learning from others, right?
Yeah, well, I mean that's great advice. Because listen, you don't have to have it all figured out. If you go and visit some shops, you'll get the answers. You'll make the relationships, make the connections. I know that when we did our podcast a few weeks ago with a Green Beret, which is really, really cool. Chad and I met him at a smartac.com retreat down in Cabo, and he was a speaker. Never heard of him before, but he was a Green Beret. And he was talking about leading through chaos. Well, I felt like that was a really appropriate episode to have on. It was really, really good because the guy's done a bunch of tours in Afghanistan and he's a special ops, Green Beret, like legit. Yeah. And he talked Chad into going and doing ride-alongs with his technicians, and he did it last week. Sent a video over to the guests, our Scott Mann, who was on there, and so now it's like part of his normal routine. He's getting back in the field. It makes you think of like Undercover Boss, except he wasn't undercover. But like it's cool to go and do that. Well, it's the same thing. Like if you can go meet with the contractor, like if you went to Chad's shop or any I have plenty of people I can name off to you. They'll come and show you all the things. Like they're not afraid to show you all the things. And if you can ask to do a ride along, and that helps you by going and seeing, I'm like a lot of times I was a good learner just by going and seeing and listening to the actual things as they happen, like going on an actual sales call or going on an actual, service call or an actual, whatever it is. I learned by being there and shadowing the best, because you can see it all. So I think it's great advice. It's an easy one. And since we're talking about going in tours, would you mind sharing your contact information with whether it be LinkedIn or if it's social media, if it's email, if it's whatever? I mean, whichever one with the listeners.
Sure. So email is probably one of the easier ways to reach me. And so my email address is just simply Lauren, Lauren, at Acosta-Inc.com. And Acosta is ACOSTA-INC.com.
Cool. I got it. And I'll share it as well, so that way they have it. I appreciate you doing that, for the listeners too. It means a lot, and you'll have people that'll reach out to you. And the listeners know that we're getting ready to go into summer. So, if a little bit of heat comes, it might get a little cray, might get a little busy. So, give a little bit of grace too. But I appreciate you being able to do that. And Lauren, man, I'm excited. Thanks for jumping on here with me, today. And it was great. I'm grateful to have you on. It's cool to have known you so long. It's cool to hear the story. It never gets old. The story about your dad never gets old hearing it.
Yeah.
I love to hear the story about your grandpa more at some point in time. That would be really cool. But thank you for giving us and the listeners your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And listen, I know we're going to have a lot of other female leaders that are going to be excited to hear your episode too. We've actually had quite a few female leaders on here too, which is cool.
Yeah.
And you got to keep in mind too, Rhino is run by a female. That is my wife. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but I appreciate you doing that, coming on here and just sharing the information that you've been through too. And obviously you still have such a big journey ahead of you. I can't wait to see if your aspirational org chart plays out. Knowing you, I have no doubt that that it will play itself out, and then you're going to create another one.
Yeah.
That's exactly
another one.
So shout out to our, to all of our listeners for, leaving the reviews and things like that. We really appreciate that. And to Lauren, and listen, if you decide you want to leave a review, because for this episode in particular for Lauren, I would love to be able to share that with her too. I'm sure she would appreciate it, but I appreciate you listening always. And, the whole purpose of the podcast is to give you some tools to continue to grow your business, to hear what others are doing, to be a student, of the trades and of the business. But, there's a lot of information that you get. You don't got to do everything, but you got to do something. No 0 days.